Hi folks, Josh Wolfe with Wolfe Vintage Watches here. Welcome to my shop. In this video, I'll be servicing a Hamilton Emerson from 1940. I'll begin by separating the case back and the bezel using a case knife. I need to be a little careful here not to mar the backside of the hooded lugs. With the movement and the dial out of the watch, I can now remove the hands. I'll put a piece of plastic over the dial to protect it from the hand levers. These levers pry the hands off the canyon pinion and hour wheel. With the hour and minute hands out of the way, I can repeat the process on the sub-seconds hand. Here I'm loosening the dial feet screws. These screws press against the dial feet, which secures the dial to the movement. Running a screwdriver under the dial, the feet are freed from their holes and we get our first look at the movement and the underside of the dial. Whoa, quite a bit of excess grease as well as rust in there. Now I can secure the movement in a movement holder and get cracking on the disassembly. The dial washer here actually puts pressure on the hour wheel, which keeps it in place under the dial. The hour wheel, followed by the canyon pinion, are removed. These two parts are where the hour and minute hand are pressure fit onto. The setting lever spring is now removed by first taking off two screws. With that out of the way, I can grab the minute wheel. And eventually, I'll be able to get a grip on the setting wheel. The yoke and the yoke spring can now be removed. It's important to protect the yoke spring from flying away, even though it appears that it's not under any load. Trust me. This version of the caliber 980 uses a cap jewel that is secured with a 2-screw setting for the balance wheel. It's critical to remove this cap jewel to make sure everything is cleaned properly. Throwing the cap jewel around is very much part of the process. You can see here just how over lubricated this jewel is. It doesn't really show up on camera, but based on the color of the oil, it looks like whoever was in here before me may have used the wrong oil. Either that or this oil has degraded so bad it's changed to a yellowish color. Now on the watchmaker's side of the movement, I'll loosen the setting lever screw and let the setting lever fall away. The crown and stem are pulled out of the movement, which lets me remove the winding pinion and clutch wheel. That completes the dial side disassembly. Back on the watchmaker's side, I'll make sure there is no power in the mainspring. I'll hold the click open and then let any remaining power down. There wasn't much, if any, in this watch. The ratchet wheel screw is removed, and the ratchet wheel itself. The crown wheel screw is reverse threaded, and in this case, is really cranked down, so it takes a little effort to get it started. With the crown wheel out of the way, I'll take out the collar that keeps the wheel spaced properly, as well as stops the screw from cinching it all the way down. The click and its integrated click spring are out next. This is a cool design. Since the spring is integrated into the click, there's really no chance at losing a spring or having it launch itself across the room. Now I can remove the bridges. There are two pry areas on the train bridge where a screwdriver can be inserted to lift the bridge away from the main plate. Using tweezers and being careful not to damage any of the wheels, I can remove the train bridge. I'm taking a quick initial inspection of the jewels here. I'm looking for any damage or missing jewels. I just want to get an idea of anything that I'll need to deal with later. The barrel bridge is removed in the same way. A little persuasion at the pry points, and the bridge is flipped over for a quick inspection. And of course I'll grab the setting lever screw now before forgetting all about it. Time for the training wheels to come on out. The center and fourth wheels are removed first to make way for the third wheel. Yikes, well, that's a greasy meatball right there. There's all kinds of gunk, oils, schmutz, hair, and other grossness in the teeth of the third wheel here. Fortunately, it looks like it's just dirty and not damaged. We'll have to see once I get it cleaned up though. The escape wheel is now removed. Oh man, what's this? More hair wrapped around the pivot. And how is this for dirty? The escape wheel is sticking to my tweezers. Not sure if that's just from the escape wheel or if it's leftovers from the third wheel. Either way, I'll be running the tweezers through the cleaning machine along with the parts. I'll get the mainspring barrel out of there, and I can now loosen the hairspring stud screw. Appropriately enough, this screw presses against the hairspring stud and keeps the balance secured. I give the stud a little nudge to loosen it out of its hole, and then I can remove the balance cock screw. Like the barrel and train wheel bridges, the balance cock has a small area where a screwdriver can be used to pry it up. A quick peek at the balance cock. So far, so good. And the balance complete is removed. Again, everything is looking pretty good so far. Next up is the pallet cock, which is held secure by just one screw on this movement. The pallet fork is now liberated from the movement. There's quite a bit of rust and goop under the pallet cock as well. Fortunately, the pallet fork itself appears to be in good shape and should clean up just fine. I'll tighten the dial feet screws so they don't come loose in the ultrasonic cleaning machine. Turning my attention to the balance cock, I can remove the end stone setting to expose the jewels for cleaning. These are the smallest screws on the movement, so a well-dressed screwdriver is key to getting them out. Once the screws are removed, the three components come apart easily. Again, it looks like the wrong oil was used to lubricate the end stone here. No matter, we'll get that squared away. I'll tighten the hairspring stud now so it doesn't shake itself loose. To open the mainspring barrel, I'll gently push down against the steel plate until the cap pops off. Using a plastic pick and tweezers, I can remove the cap, being mindful not to let the mainspring fly out. I'll wiggle the barrel arbor out, and now I can work the mainspring out. I start by working a coil or two over my thumb, then working side to side, walk the mainspring out of the barrel, being sure to keep downward pressure to control the mainspring. The bezel with its hooded lugs is in great shape. I'll just pop the acrylic crystal out now to prepare for cleaning. Speaking of cleaning, I'll take the opportunity now to pre-clean some of the worst parts. The center wheel is definitely deserving of some special attention. You can see the buildup of all the gunk and grime over the years. The ultrasonic machine could take care of this with little issue, but I prefer to manually clean what I can to keep the cleaning solution as clean and effective for as long as possible. Alright, after half an hour in the heated ultrasonic cleaner, it's time to get this baby back together. I start with winding the mainspring. Since this is a T-end style mainspring, I need to coax the end into the winder. With the mainspring securely in the winder, I carefully remove the winding arbor, making sure not to yank the wound mainspring out at the same time. You can see how tightly the mainspring really is inside the winder. Lining up the T-end with the holes in the barrel as best I can, I push the plunger down on the handle, which will push the mainspring into the barrel. Here I'm adding a bit of oil to the barrel arbor before working it into place. There's a little barb on the side of the barrel arbor that hooks into the hole at the end of the mainspring. I need to line that up so it seats properly, as well as line the arbor up with its hole in the barrel. I'll add a drop of oil to the top of the barrel arbor before refitting the barrel cap. The cap has a hole that secures the other side of the T-end of the mainspring in place, so I need to make sure that it is orientated properly. Using my tweezers, I can close up the barrel. Okay, you'll notice that this is not the same main plate that came out of the watch. After I cleaned the first main plate, there was much more damage than just a bit of rust. So I made the decision to use a donor main plate from another Hamilton caliber 980. This is one of the main advantages of focusing on a single brand to service and restore. Over the years, my stash of spare and donor movements has grown. Now, it's fairly easy and more economical to source parts from my own hoard than having to find the right part or parts on eBay. You'll notice that the bottom jewel setting is a little different on this main plate, but other than that, everything else is the same, so I can use all of the original parts without issue. An auto oiler here makes this job super easy, but it's certainly doable with a hand oiler. Now I can work on reinstalling the train of wheels. The escape wheel and the third wheel go in first, then the fourth wheel can be seated into its pivot hole. Finally, the center wheel is dropped into place. The setting lever screw goes into place so I don't forget. A final inspection of the train wheel bridge and the jewels. Everything looks shiny and clean, so I can get that installed. For the 980, 3 of the pivots need to line up, as do 2 alignment posts on the underside of the bridge before everything falls into place. It's not difficult, it just takes a little time, patience, and a steady hand. Once I think everything is in place, I'll just test for free movement. Holding the bridge in place with a plastic pick, I'll get the 2 bridge screws installed and tightened down. A little oil in the barrel arbor hole before the barrel itself is slid back into place. The barrel bridge is now installed. This bridge is a lot more straightforward to install since it only has to line up with the center wheel pivot and the barrel arbor. This bridge is secured by 3 screws, except I forgot to get the 3rd screw back in place for some reason at this point. Don't tell anyone, I'll get that fixed later. After lubricating the top barrel arbor hole, I can get the crown wheel collar back in place. Then the crown wheel drops in. Held in place by the reverse threaded screw, this wheel will transfer power from the crown and stem to the ratchet wheel to wind the watch. The click and the click spring are refitted and lubricated. And now I can get the ratchet wheel back into the movement. The square hole engages with the barrel arbor to wind the mainspring. The click only allows this wheel to spin in one direction, preventing the mainspring from unwinding. To fully tighten the ratchet wheel screw, I'll hold the click in place. I'll test again for free movement here. Time to finish off the escapement. Here I'm installing the pallet fork. This part is responsible for the ticking sound the watch makes as it stops and releases power. It's held in place by the pallet cock. This can sometimes be pretty fiddly to get the pallet pivots lined up, but once done, everything is secured with a single screw. To get the balance cock back in one piece, I start by fitting the regulator arm over the end stone setting. Then I line up the holes in the balance cock with the holes in the end stone setting. By tightening these screws down, it sandwiches the regulator arm between the 2 pieces, keeping everything in place. Just like the lower jewel setting, I'll oil the balance cock jewels with an auto oiler. Here I'm loosening the hairspring stud screw. To install the balance wheel, I line up the hairspring stud and the balance arbor pivot with their respective holes. I can then gently push the hairspring stud home. Picking up the assembly, being careful to keep it level so the balance doesn't fall out, I can tighten the screw back down, securing the hairspring stud. I can now lubricate the exit stone of the pallet fork with a special grease made just for this purpose. I'll add a bit of power to the mainspring with a couple of lines and then test the pallet to make sure it's indexing properly. The balance wheel is worked under the train of wheels and the pivot is nudged into place. And once again, we have a running watch. I'll get the balance cock screw tightened down before moving on to lubrication. Oiling can absolutely be done by hand, and many actually prefer to do it that way. I just really like using these auto oilers though. They're consistent in how much oil they dispense and are very precise. With the watchmaker side oiled up, I can flip the movement over and take care of the dial side. Very, very little oil is needed to lubricate the pivots. Just enough to coat the inside of the jewel hole. Much more than that, the risk of oil migrating to where it shouldn't be and picking up dirt and grime increases. While I'm on the dial side, I'll set the setting lever in place. Holding it down with the tip of my finger and flipping the movement over, I tighten the setting lever screw down only partially. The clutch wheel and winding pinion are now lubricated with a little grease. Again, less is more when it comes to lubricating a watch. That done, the clutch wheel is installed, followed by the winding pinion. The stem is also lubricated with the same grease before it's installed. The stem passes through the winding pinion and the clutch. Depending on the position of the crown, the winding pinion will either wind the watch or the clutch wheel will engage the setting wheel to set the time. The clutch wheel and the post for the yoke are lubricated. All this lubrication not only helps prevent wear and tear on the parts, but it also improves the feel of winding and setting the watch. The yoke spring is installed, followed by the yoke. The yoke pushes against the clutch wheel, moving it to the time setting or the winding positions. A bit of grease between the yoke and yoke spring, and a bit between the setting lever and the yoke. The interaction between these two parts is what moves the yoke back and forth. Here you can see how all the parts work together. A little grease on the center wheel post before the canyon pinion is pressed home. This is what the minute hand will eventually be friction fit onto. Posts for the setting wheel and minute wheel get a little oil before they are installed. To button up the keyless works, I can now refit the setting lever spring. This part keeps all the other parts in place, as well as creates the two positions of the crown. The two index grooves I'm lubricating here create positive stops for the setting lever, which are the winding and time setting positions of the stem. That job done, I'll clean up any excess grease. Here I'm loosening the dial feet screws to prepare to reinstall the dial. The hour wheel and dial washer are up next. Okay, now for a light cleaning of the dial. When it comes to dials, I try to do as little as possible. For me, it's a lot easier to make a dial worse than it is to significantly improve it. First, I start with just a bit of Rodico to clean up the major bits of shmoo. Then, feeling a bit adventurous, I now give some pegwood a try. This is a softwood, but can still damage a dial. You can see as I move around the dial how much grime has built up over the years. Working slowly and being as patient as I can, I gently and lightly scrub off decades of dirt, nicotine, hair, and various other stuff. I'm particularly careful with any painted areas of the dial. I definitely don't want to pull any of that up. I continued to clean up the dial for another 45 minutes or so off camera, and this is the final result. Not perfect, but not bad for an 80-year-old watch either. Now I can get the acrylic crystal glued into the bezel using a special adhesive. I run a very small bead along the inside of the bezel, working fairly quickly before the glue starts to set up. Then I can push the acrylic crystal into place, making sure it fully seats. While the glue dries, I'll get the dial back on. I line up the dial feet and press the dial down into place. Then I can tighten the dial feet screws, securing the dial to the movement. Time to install the handset. Starting with the hour hand, I'll just get it pressed onto the hour wheel. Then I align it with the 12 o'clock position. I can then align the minute hand with the hour hand and the 12 o'clock position. It too is pressed into place with a hand pusher. Touching up the dial a bit here. The sub-seconds hand can now be refitted onto the extended pivot of the fourth wheel. It's always a good idea to check for clearance and that none of the hands interfere with each other or the applied numerals. The movement and dial are pressed back into the case and the bezel is snapped on, completing the service of this awesome little watch. To see this and other restored vintage watches, please check out my website, wolfevintagewatches.com. As always, I appreciate you watching and thank you for liking and commenting. Be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos. See you next time. Bye.